surprised at all that so many prominent Democrats have kind of gone the same route in the last couple of days? I mean, yeah, Ed Markey saying Israel has the right to defend itself from indiscriminate rocket attacks, and Pelosi saying something similar. And
but she's not progressive, and he dresses as he cosplays as progressive, and he's become progressive. But yeah,
no,
point taken. Obviously,
I get that. Seemingly everywhere else, there's been like movement on this issue, but there really hasn't been much of a budge in Washington. You know,
you're totally right, and I was surprised to see Ed Markey say that, and I am kind of alarmed because U.S. politicians feel the need to preempt anything that they say with that statement. Israel has the right to defend itself from rockets, and someone actually confronted Ned Price, Biden's State Department spokesperson. Yeah, do you want to play that?
Sadly, what's stunning about this isn't the response. I mean, it's stunning, but it's typical and to be expected. What I actually thought was surprising is that these reporters even ask the questions, and we'll see them ask them.
We're speaking of the principle of self-defense.
I'm asking if you think that the principle of self-defense applies to the retaliatory the airstrikes that they're conducting in response.
Matt, this is a very fluid situation. I would hesitate to comment on operations beyond the rocket fire that is clearly targeting innocent civilians in Israel. So I would hesitate to speak to specific operations that have just occurred, but the broader principle of self-defense is something we stand by on behalf of Israel and every other country.
Do you think that an Israeli military response to the rockets coming in, a military response to the rockets coming in is covered by this broader rubric of self-defense, right?
Self-defense often does authorize the use of force.
Thank you, Matt. I want to ask you about East Jerusalem, but let's talk about what you said about the principle of self-defense. Does that in any way apply to the Palestinians? Do they have a right to self-defense? Do Palestinians have a right to self-defense?
In broadly speaking, Saeed, we believe in the concept of self-defense. We believe it applies to any state. I don't think that. I certainly wouldn't want my words to be construed as.
I understand. I want to ask you. I don't want to harp on this either, but the Israelis killed 13 people just now. Including maybe 5 or 6 children. Do you condemn that?
I believe, right, that at that point, not a single Israeli had been killed. I believe at this point. Right. So they had fired rockets that were intercepted by the Iron Dome.
I'm asking, do you condemn the killing of Palestinian children?
Obviously, and these reports are just emerging, and I understand, I was just speaking to the team, I understand we don't have independent confirmation of facts on the ground yet, so I'm very hesitant to get into reports that are
that's a good move.
Obviously, the deaths of civilians, be they Israeli or
very
Palestinians,
diplomatic.
are something we would take very seriously.
Okay.
You're going to know as soon as I read what your answer was that there's a big problem with it. You said, well, not a problem, it just doesn't answer the question. We believe that it, meaning the right
I love this guy,
applies to any state. Well, you see the problem, right? Yes?
Do you want to?
Do you regard Palestine as a state?
I wasn't
referring. Do you think that you don't in the context of the ICC and the UN? So are you saying that you do not? If it applies to any state, are you saying that Palestinians don't have a right to self-defense?
I was making a broader point, not attached to Israel or Palestinians in that case.
So,
isn't this guy a CIA guy? He is.
Matt,
really?
I'm not in a position to debate the legalities from up here. What our message is one of de-escalation.
There's a couple things he does, right? He does we don't know the facts on the ground yet. Somehow he's certain about the rockets, right? Which have, by the way, not killed anyone, but he's certain about those. There's no fact checking needed there. But he can't really comment on the fact that family was wiped out by Israeli airstrikes. Got it. He has
That's just spokesman 101 though. Like when you don't want to answer a question, just like, oh, I'm not sure of the facts yet. Like next.
Right. Mm-hmm. But he cannot. Like it's amazing. He just cannot say that he condemned. He won't say that Palestinians have the right to self-defense, and he also can't condemn what Israel's done. Like he can't say either of those things.
This whole episode just tells you that the relationship is not breakable, I don't think, between the United States government and Israel. It's probably, I'm guessing, mutual security arrangements are such that you're just not going to see the executive branch of the United States ever condemn anything Israel does. Maybe if there's pressure to Congress, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Israel is such an important strategic proxy to the U.S. And even Biden said as such a decade or so ago. He said if Israel didn't exist, we would have to create her to protect our interests in the region. And I really think that says it all. They see it as an extension of the U.S. It's essentially an outpost that they can use to deploy operations and, bomb Assad and whatever they want to do, intervene in Syria, Lebanon, all of that. But yeah, I think that the subsidization of Israel really speaks to the amount that they are, they're willing to go to great lengths to keep this regime propped up with military arsenal and funding. Yeah, I mean, Biden and all of them. I mean, it's really interesting too, because the whole progressive except for Palestine seems to be a really strong current still across the political establishment from the liberals, but among the progressive community, it's totally not tenable anymore, and it's becoming less and less tenable over the course of the last couple of years. So it is interesting to see that have zero impact, right? And basically no reflection whatsoever in the political class, other than very few members of the squad. What will it take? I mean, God, I don't know.
I gotta say that the squad isn't covering itself in glory here either, though. I mean, they went after Yang over this, but then they kind of look the other way with their own caucus.
Yeah, exactly.
That's like 100% performative politics, where they're trying to maintain the cred for being progressive without shaking up any of the relationships on the Hill.
Yeah, exactly. Where's the calling out for Pelosi, Biden? I mean,
right.
Let's talk about the people who are in power.
Yeah, Markey.
Yeah,
what the hell?
Exactly.
I mean, Bernie, of course, has condemned it. And it's ironic. I mean, it kind of makes sense in some ways. The Jewish guy is like the best senator on this issue is Bernie Sanders. I think he probably has some, besides being like an exceptionally principled person, he probably has some leeway because he's Jewish and will be called like a self-loathing Jew as opposed to an anti-Semite.
Right. Yeah, but it is curious that everyone has to begin their statements with "we support Israel's right to self-defense against rockets," without explaining again, like there's very crucial context being omitted every time these statements are put out, not only from what preceded it in the immediate history, but just the entire situation of colonial conquest that's been ongoing, coming up 73 years. I mean, this Saturday is the anniversary of the Nakba.
Right, the Nakba, which is the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians.
Yeah, it's the creation when the state of Israel was created after World War II. Nearly 1 million Palestinians were ethnically cleansed. Those who wouldn't leave their homes were killed. 500 Arab villages were razed to the ground, and a lot of the people were deported to Gaza, and that's why Gaza is still 75% of them are refugees from lands, right outside of their border. And this is a very important moment, because the UN, after the ethnic cleansing with the Nakba, the UN actually issued Declaration 164 that said the Palestinian refugees that were ethnically cleansed have the right to return. And so Palestinians, that's why they hold up the key, because they said we have the right to return under this UN charter. And again, just another violation of international law that has been violated since that day.
Can you talk about, I mean, for people who haven't seen Gaza Fights for Freedom, which I really, really recommend, again, why you released it the day that you did, re-released it for free, and how much has changed on the ground since? And then I want to talk to you about how, YouTube has responded.
Absolutely. And I wanted to just tack something on what I just said about, the foundation of Israel. And what's really interesting, because this was always the plan, was to expel the indigenous population. It's not like it just it has become super right-wing and of course more racist in recent history, but from the foundation of the state, I mean, it's a settler colonial state, right? And after the expulsion of the indigenous peoples, in 1954, they actually put in place something called the Prevention of Infiltration Law that laid mines in the routes of refugees trying to return. and actually authorized a shoot to kill order for refugees trying to return and adhere to this UN charter of the right to return. And if you really look at like in a broad scope, this is what's still happening in Gaza. There's a shoot to kill order anyone who comes close to the fence. Now, Gaza Fights for Freedom, we just released for free. It was a documentary that we made in 2019. I came on Useful Idiots right after it was released to talk about it. I really appreciate you guys giving me that space to do that. And we decided it was a really historic moment right now because this could potentially be a breakthrough moment for Palestine. There are protests erupting all over the occupied territories. There are protests erupting all over the world, solidarity protests with what's going on right now. I feel like we have not seen something like this since the second Intifada, and it has the potential for something huge, a dam to break, because Israel miscalculated here. They thought that they could commit this ethnic cleansing of East Jerusalem without any pushback. And that was a miscalculation on their part. And so we felt like the time is now to get this information out there, to provide crucial historical context to the situation, and also unequivocal proof of war crimes being committed, clear violations of the Geneva Convention charters, specifically of targeting protected categories, which is what Gaza Fights for Freedom lays out so clearly. Because we're told that, why don't Palestinians peacefully protest? Well, it doesn't matter if you peacefully protest or not, you still are treated in the exact same way. So for example, the Great March of Return, tens of thousands of Palestinians went to peacefully protest against this kind of artificial border that's confining them in an open air prison, and they were shot dead. Hundreds of them were sniped. Tens of thousands of them were shot with live ammunition, exploding bullets, another clear violation of international law. And we're talking about children directly targeted on camera, proof that the documentary shows. Disabled people in wheelchairs targeted and killed, sniped to death for simply just being in front of the fence, holding a flag many, many meters away from the fence, clearly posing no threat to Israeli authorities whatsoever. And then you also have journalists and medics, of course, that were directly targeted, just war crime upon war crime. Of course, that's the story of Razan al-Najjar, the anniversary of her murder is coming up on June 1st. So what we wanted the documentary to do was just be used as a tool to help with the ICC rulings in the future and to really help spread the consciousness that these are war crimes being committed in our name. The US government is sponsoring these atrocities with $10 million every single day and providing complete political cover and impunity for what's going on. And I think it's just the time is well past due that we really open our eyes to what's going on. And we hope that this documentary really kind of laid that case clear. And of course, it's being suppressed. We know that a lot of Israeli affiliates work with Facebook censoring and agencies that are actually working to suppress Palestinian voices. I mean, this has been going on for a long time on Facebook, and of course, Google changing their algorithms to suppress just alternative content in a broader sense. But YouTube immediately removed our video from search results. So for the first day or two, when we launched this, you could not find the movie at all if you looked on Google search results or YouTube search results for the movie. It was basically everything else, every interview that I've done on it, except the movie itself. People said that the movie was removed from their subscriptions. They usually get subscription notifications if a new Empire Files episode is released. That did not happen. And then, of course, slapped an age restriction on it immediately, but not just an age restriction. Hundreds of people have told me that even when they prove their age and even when they log into their Gmail account and prove that they are of age in order to watch the movie, they have to actually put an additional security layer. So put like an identification card or a credit card to actually prove their identity in order to watch the movie. That's something that I have actually never heard before. Very fascinating. I mean, I would not be surprised if the movie were entirely taken down ultimately from YouTube because of the mass flagging, I'm sure, in place from Zionists. I know that there is also a war room. I mean, Tel Aviv University has a literal war room that students use to quote unquote correct the record online. And that's really how they've won the information war for this long. Not only does the US establishment, media and political establishment run cover for Israel's crimes, but also, of course, the corporate media does. Social media has in large part changed this in the last couple of years.
They're going to make you do a Rubik's Cube in less than 30 seconds in order to see the movie.
Yeah, right.
Put this blindfold on. If you can get this done in 30 seconds and you have a credit card that proves you're the right age, like you can watch the movie. Maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. But did you make any headway with, I don't know, trying to talk to the platform about reversing any of this, or?
Yeah, actually, YouTube did respond to me on Twitter, and they said the search results are now fixed or whatever, and now you can find it on search results. So I don't know what that was about, but as far as all the other additional layers of security, nothing has been touched on that part. But I was impressed to see that YouTube actually responded, because I mean, it is really alarming, the amount of censorship that's going on with just colleagues and, you know, people who are just associated with alternative media in general. Like, I don't care what your view is on vaccines or COVID, just talking about these issues can just get your entire body of work just erased, you know, and that I think is a very alarming trend. And I don't really think there's anything that we can do to stand up against that, because it just seems to be getting worse. And it's just all under the banner of fighting fake news. You know, this goes back to the DNI report in 2016, and it's just going to keep getting worse. You know, I don't know what the solution is, other than like directly funding alternative media like this show. Like, that's the world that we live in today. We can't
specifically
really
this show, actually.
Usefulidiots.substack.com.
Exactly. That's what we have to do. We have to actually sponsor and support the journalists that we want to see thrive, because these algorithms they reign supreme, and they are actually curating our reality for us on behalf of our tech overlords.
You're such a Renaissance woman, so versatile, that you are not only having your film suppressed, which, by the way, just goes to show you, unless you're totally tracking that, and people with smaller platforms are not going to have, you know, dozens of people telling them, hey, I subscribed, it's not showing up, blah, blah, blah. So YouTube will do that shit all the time and usually get away with it. And they probably wouldn't have responded to you if you didn't have such a big presence. But you also have been censored in a more direct, intimate way, right? You spoke to, you refused to sign a contract to speak in Georgia, and you were uninvited. Can you tell that story, please?
Absolutely. So
why you're suing Georgia?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk about cancel culture right now. And I think that the biggest, most extreme example of what's going on is actually state-imposed laws. I mean, we're talking about 30 or so states in the US that have actually legislated criminalization of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. So going back to like the notion that Israel doesn't kind of allow resistance, whether it be peaceful or armed resistance, of course, but not only within occupied Palestine, but just on an international level. They have really gone out of their way to ensure that a peaceful resistance in terms of internationally mounted pressure, akin to the BDS movement that brought down apartheid South Africa or brought down Jim Crow in this country, harkening back to like Montgomery bus boycotts, right? This is a constitutionally protected right that the Supreme Court included in our First Amendment rights. And so 30 or so states have actually criminalized this. They've passed laws that forbid independent contractors from working in these states. It doesn't matter if you're a construction worker, if you're a substitute teacher, or if you're like me, just going and giving a keynote address at a university. You are given a contract that says, there's a clause in the contract that says you can never boycott the state of Israel if you want to make this money. And so they are asking Americans to forfeit their First Amendment rights in order to work in these states. Tens of thousands of people have signed these contracts, and I refused to sign such a contract. I was very shocked that this was in, you know, that I was having to sign essentially what it is a pro-Israel loyalty pledge in order to work. And so I refused to do it. I decided to sue the state of Georgia. And a couple days after I filed my lawsuit, Benjamin Netanyahu's Ministry of Strategic Affairs actually tweeted, "Whoever boycotts us will be boycotted. We have worked very hard to pass these laws in the US, and we will, you know, we won't take this without a fight," or something. I'm paraphrasing, but it really was an explicit admission of direct foreign interference in our laws, threatening economic consequences for Americans who want to peacefully exercise their First Amendment. You know, not only the right to free speech, to speak out against what Israel's doing, but also the right to peaceful boycotts, which is a historic tradition that has brought down some cruel practices in United States history. And what I pose to people to just kind of highlight how ludicrous these laws are is replace Israel with Russia. You cannot have or ever will boycott the country of Russia, right, in order to work in a state. And then you have Putin taking to Twitter days later being like, I'm very proud that I have passed all these laws in the US. Right. I mean, it's just like, how is this real? You know, and then beyond that, the Georgia state legislature tried to change the law to render my case moot. And so they brought an Israeli consulate official to the state legislature to actually argue on behalf of Israel to say that we should change the law so then we can keep it in place. And I think that really just speaks volumes to kind of the incestuous relationship that Matt was speaking about earlier. It's really this kind of unshakable allegiance and alliance with Israel that just makes no sense, because this is a foreign government, right? And we hear constantly that foreign interference is bad and undermines our democracy. Well, why is it that this is allowed to happen? And why is it that our rights are being directly undermined by a foreign government? And how is it possible that like government officials have accepted this? You know, I mean, do they not understand what the Constitution says? You know, like how would these laws pass in the first place?
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that, you know, they haven't faced sort of ACLU challenges in every one of those states. It's kind of, maybe they have and they lost, but it's pretty tough to imagine a judge actually signing off on that opinion. But it's amazing. So what's the status of your case?
So right now, Trua, which is a rabbi organization, and J Street, of course, a famous Jewish organization on the Hill, they have both signed amicus briefs to support my case. And these are two organizations that do not support the BDS movement,
really
but they
important.
understand that this conflation, that how dangerous this is kind of as a slippery slope. And they have, it's very brave and honorable that these organizations have signed on, because they understand how disturbing this trend is, and they have stood side by side with, of course, other Jewish organizations around the world that have denounced the criminalization of peaceful boycotts. Matt, to your point, Texas has faced a legal challenge, and so has Wisconsin, and they have both been. The judge has both ruled in both cases. I'm sorry, the judge has ruled that the law is unconstitutional. So it has set a precedent that I have optimism that in my case the judge will do the same. But there have been other states that have ruled, that have changed the law, like they're trying to do in my case. And so it's been kind of a muddied differences of opinion that, you know, ultimately maybe it will go to the Supreme Court so we can actually once and for all declare that these laws are totally absurd and unconstitutional.
Do you have anything gratuitous and obnoxious that you might want to say about Oz Katerji?
Oh yeah.
I think he's a fucking plant, man. This guy, you know, it's like to actually spearhead this movement to say that Jeremy Corbyn is an anti-Semite, you know, and actually have the audacity to still pose as some sort of progressive. I mean, you're a fucking plant, man. Who are you?
Yeah. And who's he to say? No offense, but that's not your lane.
Yeah,
Jewish.
I find him very sus. Very, very sus.
Yeah,
He also has a really bad like music, like Britney Spears pop, like electro pop music that's just like absolute trash.
Like he's in a band?
Oh, that makes him more interesting to me.
Yeah, that's one of his more redeemable qualities.
No, it's horrible. If you heard it wouldn't.
He's a musician or what?
If you heard it, it wouldn't be interesting to you. You would just actually feel shame for him.
Yeah.
Is it kind of Justin Timberlake-y? Like?
No, it's worse. It's way worse than that. I forget the name of the band.
You say that like Justin Timberlake is bad. I think Justin Timberlake, but yeah.
Matt, did you ask just because you know he targets people like Abby, or did you come across something?
No, I figured the Syria.
Oh yeah, the Syria.
Oh yeah, I mean, I see him and all of his like little, you know, minions targeting useful idiots all the time and trying, you know.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we got him.
I mean, it's ridiculous. He has a podcast. It's like, who is listening?
Yeah, podcast about how bad Corbyn is. Also, yeah.
Wait, what? Are you serious?
Yeah, it's a Corbyn podcast.
Where's the music?
I know. I'm trying to find it. I'm trying to find it. God,
you know what's interesting? I have to say about the Israel stuff. Here's where it has kind of shifted in that, like, Israel Palestine used to be the third rail among like leftists, liberals. It's no longer that. I mean, it's still the third rail among the establishment politicians. But it is funny how there are people with whom I totally, the three of us really disagree on things it's so morally black and white, I guess. And as Max points out, though, it also is easy because there's no state there really to speak of. So you're allowed to kind of like avoid, all you're doing is condemning Israel, as you should, but you don't have to get behind another state because there isn't a Palestinian state.
I had an older reporter when I was starting my career give me 2 pieces of advice about how to get through your journalism career. The first thing he said is, when you're drunk, before you go to sleep, drink a whole liter of water.
That's good. Yeah.
That was number one. The second one is never talk about Israel or Palestine.
There you go.
Wow.
Because it's a no-win situation career-wise. So that is definitely a thing. It's changing though.
Well, you should ask him, because I'm curious. I think it has become now like Syria and Russia.
Right.
What do you mean?
So like writing. I don't think that. It depends where, but I think that and of course there's bullshitty ways I don't think Israel-Palestine is any longer the third rail in terms of like covering it. Like if you want to cover it, depending where, we can look at the New York Times and NPR. What they do is they just totally, I should have prepared some headlines, but we've seen these things like, clashes. There's all this discussion of clashes, right? So there's a total false equivalency and like a refusal to actually come down on the issue in any meaningful way. But there is, there's something in the Washington Post about it.
The truth is leaking through.
Yeah, more than it used to. Yeah.
Right. But at the same time, I just saw a Palestinian say that he just did a podcast with the Washington Post, and they literally censored like colonizer, apartheid, brutal violence. Like they like chopped up everything that he said and just like made this really sanitized, condensed version of his answers.
Right.
And then you had I remember NPR, I was listening a couple months ago, and they actually had to issue a retraction for saying the word Palestine.
What?
Like they actually said, the host came on the next day and he was like, I said Palestine yesterday and I have to say occupied territories or whatever because Palestine isn't like a country. And I was just
unless he wasn't doing that in like a woke way to like highlight the facts of the country.
No. Yeah, no, he wasn't doing it in a woke way at all. And you just see this time and again, which is so fascinating because even like AP and Reuters, which was, I guess I thought for the longest time, were supposed to be like these neutral news wires that then get editorialized by publications when like you see their headlines for what's going on there, and it's just fucking outrageous. Like the car attack, the settler rammed into 2 Palestinians, like just like Charlottesville, and the headline was Palestinians throw rocks at crashed car. It's like what?
Unbelievable. You really can't make it up. You can't make it up.
For years there was a cliche that the ideal standalone photo for page 3 in any newspaper was the rock throwing Arab. So like the editors, would learn over the years that whenever you had a hole in the paper, you go through the wires and you find that picture and stick it in there. So that it's a cliche of journalism, that scene. You never show the before or the context or whatever it is. So because it's an easy shot to get, like, whereas the context is much more complicated.
Now we actually see the potential for this erupting into something very large. For the first time, I think we could see this becoming an armed conflict beyond Gaza. Last time Israeli forces actually went into Gaza, they were pretty humiliated. They lost quite a few soldiers. A lot of them were American. And now, there's a potential for the same thing to kind of erupt. We just saw Yemen, Lebanon, Iraq have all pledged armed resistance if Palestine's calls for it. Things are very heated. Tensions are very high. And we've seen numerous Israeli cabinet officials promise to, quote unquote, flatten the Gaza Strip. We're talking about 2 million people, 50% children, 75% refugees that don't have electricity, clean water, very, very condensed area that even the UN said was uninhabitable 2 years ago, actually just inciting complete genocide. You had Netanyahu say we're going to flatten many more buildings. You saw today the Al Sharok Journalist Tower, which houses several international media organizations, completely flattened. This was the same tower that was shelled in 2012 when I was working at Russia Today. That an RT journalist's leg was blown off in one of the shellings of Israel. And RT actually asked for a statement being like, why did you, bomb this journalist tower that houses international media? And Avita Lebovich, the IDF spokesperson, said, of course, we knew there were journalists in the building. Everything in Gaza is a Hamas target. And RT has taken a side in the coverage. RT has taken a side in the coverage. It was not even a tacit admitting of war crimes. It was like actually just explicitly saying we bombed this tower because RT was like covering this. It was a pretty shocking moment. I would say a turning point for me, at least in my political awakening about the situation.
So there's a real possibility that if they go in, that there are going to be forces from other countries that are going to deploy.
That's what these groups have said. I mean, countries have said, if you call for us, we will be there. I don't know how exactly it would work, but it's definitely wild. And it's definitely, like I said before, I mean, this is beyond Gaza. This is across the West Bank. They've actually issued a state of emergency in an area that hasn't seen that since the late 60s. This really does have the potential to erupt into a third intifada. People are replacing Israeli flags with Palestinian flags. That's a jailable offense for years and years just alone. I mean, the bravery is just unbelievable. That Palestinians are even going out there and participating in these protests is just something that I don't think that people can really wrap their minds around.
We'll have to see how have to have you back on to talk about what the denouement of all this is, because it's going to be interesting to watch. I mean, I guess my last question is just, is there any hint at all that the Biden administration is taking even a slightly different approach to this from previous administrations? I mean, it's just absolute continuity, right?
Yeah, 100% continuity. I mean, it's really 100% continuity, I would say, in a lot of foreign policy endeavors from the Trump administration.
Right.
You know, I mean, Cuba, no change in policy there. Venezuela, they're still pursuing regime change. The sanctions aren't being lifted off Iran. And now you have with Palestine, the embassies not being moved from Jerusalem. That was a huge blow to Palestinian sovereignty. And no, there's absolute continuity. Of course, it's not as flagrant, out in the open, where you had Jared Kushner's family personally profiting from illegal settlement expansion and like hosting Netanyahu in his New York penthouse. Like that was like pretty extreme. But yeah, I mean, the Trump administration posed quite a problem for liberals and the liberal sensibilities, because it really like exposed this kind of fascist alliance and allegiance with Trump and Netanyahu, and like, people, you can't call Israel the greatest democracy in the world while it's run by someone like Netanyahu, and while the majority of Israeli society wants someone like Netanyahu. And then when you have this allegiance with Trump and all the liberals hate Trump so much, yet they still bent over backwards to defend Israel. And so it caused quite a conundrum for them explaining away the situation. So now Biden provides another, political cover for the ongoing situation to continue without that confusion. But yeah, I mean, complete continuity. I would say that one thing that is very encouraging, not only the solidarity actions on the ground, not only the BDS movements mounting around the world with divestment campaigns being successful in a lot of places, but Betty McCollum, a sitting congresswoman who's introduced a bill to condition aid to Israel. I think she introduces it like every year or something. And this year she has a lot of significant co-sponsors on it. Of course, AIPAC is very scared of this bill, and you have like 70% of Congress actually like signing onto a statement condemning the bill. But just the fact that a lot of people have signed onto it and it's getting more traction than it ever has. I mean, it is the beginning of something, because if pressure mounts to the extent that I know it will against what is going on, Congress will have no choice. But you do bring up a good point, Matt. It's that, can we really make apartheid fall across the world if this government is just completely going to prop up, what's happening? And that's why I'm advocating a BDS movement against this government. I mean, we need BDS here against what our government is doing around the world, whether it be Palestine, Colombia, or Africa. I mean, this has to end. This has to stop, because there's tens of millions of people being oppressed by our policies, and people really need to start linking these struggles together with why we can't have things like healthcare and college education here, because just every single cent is being squandered to this endless military industrial complex. It really has to start here, though. We have to pressure our government, because that's the only way that we're going to bring justice and liberation to Palestine.
Quickly, before you leave, do you want to just give us a little tour about, like, in a sentence, all the things you're working on? Like, a sentence of and your take, what's happening in Colombia, what's happening here or there?
Yeah, I mean, Colombia, Hugo Chavez called it the Israel of Latin America, and it really is kind of an appropriate way to describe Colombia, because Colombia is the largest outpost for U.S. militarism in Latin America. It is the largest recipient of U.S. aid outside of Israel during the Dirty War. I mean, you can go back decades and see the impact of U.S. policies there that have facilitated just horrific death and destruction, war essentially against anyone that was deemed to be on the left. This is unions, communists, but beyond that, peasants, trade unionists. Colombia is the most dangerous place in the world for trade unionists. More trade unionists are killed there than anywhere else in the world combined. We went there, we were on the front lines of the drug war a couple of years ago, and it was a pretty startling situation. Again, completely obfuscated and omitted by the corporate media, which only points the finger at Venezuela. Meanwhile, Colombia is an extremely dangerous place for social leaders. People are dying every day, especially former FARC leaders who have demobilized and are now working in the context of social justice. And this is because of essentially a fascist government that is propped up again by this administration. Biden, one of Biden's first weapons deals was tens of millions of dollars to Colombia. And right now you see historic protests erupting against IMF austerity measures that are extracting wealth from poor and middle class people in the country. And they have been pushed to the precipice, and they are protesting, and 1,000 or more people have been disappeared. I think Americans can't wrap their minds around what that means. That means that you went to a protest and you never came home. There is no record of your arrest. That is a very scary concept, and that has a historic, disturbing legacy in Colombia as well, where hundreds of thousands of people were disappeared during the Dirty War, never to be heard or seen again. And that is horrific. And that is what's happening right now, as well as dozens of people who have been outright murdered by Colombian forces. They are in unmarked cars, shooting people dead. They are turning off the internet and committing crimes under the cover of darkness. We spoke to a student leader in the epicenter of the protests in Cali, and they are in fear for their life. And again, the bravery, not only in Colombia, but in Palestine and anywhere else that is resisting these kind of forces, it's just unmatched. And we just need to have just our utmost solidarity for the people who are oppressed and who are fighting back. And I just can't stress enough how important programs like this program is that you guys are having me on right now. And it's really up to us to continue to fund and prop up the alternative media that is really telling the truth, right? Cutting through this kind of corporate media narrative that just essentially just goes in line with the orthodoxy of whatever U.S. foreign policy is. And it's time that we really get the other side of the story here.
Well, thank you so much, Abby, for coming on. Really appreciate it, and good luck with your suit and your case.
Yeah, we'll be character witnesses if you want.
Check it out, Gaza Fights for Freedom on YouTube. Spread the word, and thank you so much, you guys. Matt, Katie, you guys rock.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye, guys. Thanks so much.
Okay, so this is after Yang tweeted that terrible thing that actually Newsweek covered the response to it, including my own tweet, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, this is Yang kind of thinking that he's doing damage control. He tweeted out a prayers emoji, and then I guess this is a screenshot of a statement he released. I spoke to a group of volunteers for the campaign yesterday, some of whom have been with me for years. Many of them were upset with my recent tweet expressing solidarity with the people of Israel in conjunction with the violence in the region this week that has claimed the lives of innocents and children on both sides. They expressed to me that they follow and support me for a number of reasons. One is that I'm a clear-headed person who follows facts. The other is that I'm a human being who stands for universal values of fellowship and goodwill. They felt that my tweet was overly simplistic in my treatment of a conflict that has a long and complex history full of tragedies, and they felt it failed to acknowledge the pain and suffering on both sides. They were, of course, correct. I mourn for every Palestinian life taken before its time, as I do for every Israeli. Suffering and pain and violence and death suffered by anyone hurts us all. All people want to be able to live in peace. We all want that for ourselves and our children. Support of a people does not make one blind to the pain and suffering of others. Again, most everyone simply wants to be able to live and pray in peace. And that is what we want as well. I join with millions around the world in praying that the current situation be resolved as quickly as possible, peacefully, and with minimal suffering. For those who have spoken to me on this, thank you. Continue to believe in humanity. I mean, it's just like an extended platitude that continues to make a false equivalence.
Yeah, I mean, how many politicians are gonna come out and say people said I was wrong and they were right?
Oh no, that's not the issue. I mean, I actually think he does a fairly good job at that part, but I think he's just, instead of just being like, he still refuses to condemn anything that Israel does.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of forcing people to condemn things. I think that.
Well, I'm not speaking of that as a I'm not talking about it as a strategy. I'm just saying that what happens is someone makes a big. I mean, this just speaks to what you guys were saying, which is that Yang is just running for mayor in New York, but that politicians really won't, with the exception of Sanders and some in the squad, no one will actually acknowledge. I mean, it's pretty black and white what's happening. No one will acknowledge it, with a small exception.
I mean, he's running for mayor of New York. There's
some pandering that must be done.
Not many politicians even show any even the willingness to re-examine their beliefs at all ever. So
right,
I'm a little more generous.
I guess I don't think he's re-examining them. That it's just, I mean, it's damage control, which I guess it's good that we have the strength to get him to release a statement. We didn't always. By the way, did you see this? That at Politico, if you've read a quote from an administration official in a newspaper or a wire story recently, there's a good chance that the White House communications team had an opportunity to edit it first. That's because the Biden White House frequently demands that interviews with administration officials be conducted on grounds known colloquially as background with, quote, approval. In practice, that means that the information from an interview can be used in the story, but in order for the person's name to be attached to a quote, the reporter must transcribe the quotes they want and then send them to the communications team to approve, veto, or edit them.
It's not that unusual, and it's not like it's a government dictate. You're agreeing,
right?
You're one of the two people agreeing to that deal.
Well, interestingly enough, the next paragraph is West Wing playbook must make a confession here. We have participated in such arrangements too. The other week, the White House asked for background with quote approval for an interview with White House Communications Kate Bedingfield for a profile about speechwriter Vinay Reddy. Close to deadline and with our editors giving us side eye about filing late, we agreed. The practice allows the White House an extra measure of control as it tries to craft press coverage. At its best, quote approval allows sources to speak more candidly about their work. As at its worst, it gives public officials a way to obfuscate or screen their own admissions and words.
In 95% of interviews, it's actually a mutually beneficial thing because
you're covering your own asses.
Well, yeah, the person who's giving the interview wants to be able to speak candidly, but
right.
wants the option of going back and saying, "Oh, probably shouldn't have said that,"
Right. Yeah.
And the reporter doesn't want to be misquoting somebody. Most of the time, when it's a friendly situation, that's okay. The only time when you probably shouldn't do that is when it's a serious, potentially challenging interview with a politician. You don't want to give them those terms because you want it to be on the record, and if they say something, they say it, right?
Right.
That's not really their fault that they're asking for it. It's your fault for agreeing to it.
Right. Well, again, interesting. Wow, you're so prescient, Matt. The Biden White House isn't the first to employ the practice. Many reporters say it's reminiscent of the tightly controlled Obama White House. The Trump White House used it too, but reporters say Trump's team did it so less frequently than Biden's team, which also used the tactic during the campaign. And a number of current White House reporters have become increasingly frustrated by what they see as its abuse. Quote, the rule treats them like coddled Capitol Hill pages, and that's not who they are or the protections they deserve, said one reporter. Every reporter I work with has encountered the same practice, said another. Okay, end quote. And then, but as is often the case with the unwieldy White House press corps, there is a collective action problem. Reporters are reluctant to say no to using background with quote approval because it could put them at a disadvantage with their competitors. The only way the press has the power to push back against this is if we all band together, said the first reporter. At least one White House reporting team has been talking internally about reaching out to other outlets to push the Biden team to stop the practice. Quote, have any reporters talked about mutinying? The second reporter asked us, if you start fomenting an insurrection, keep me updated.
Okay. That's like, they're wrong. Like it's a leverage game, right? So the reason the Biden administration and any other politician can get away with this is because the reporters need the quotes more than the administration needs to talk to these reporters. The way you get them to stop doing this is by getting them to need to be quoted in your publication. So one way to do that is to do hard-hitting reporting on them, call them up and say, yeah, we've got this thing on you. Do you want to comment? And they say, well, yeah, we want quote approval. Well, the answer is no, right? So you can either be quoted or suck it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
And they'll still get out, and you may not be happy with it.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So if you don't have anything that they need to respond to, then of course they're going to do this. Like, you need them more than they need you, right? So
you sound like a union buster. You don't like this idea of collective mutinying.
I'm not much for collective journalistic action. Yeah. No. I mean, like the reporters who talk this way, like there was talk about this kind of thing when, like, for instance, George Bush used to freeze out people who asked just difficult questions about the war, right? And so, like, there was talk, well, maybe we just shouldn't answer any of this. We shouldn't give them an opportunity to give their bullshit answers about anything if they're going to treat the other members of the press corps that way. Like, I kind of get that, but bitching and moaning about conditions that you yourself gave is pretty weak. I don't know.
Well, I think this is their attempt to fight back, right? Because then they go after that, keep me updated on the mutiny thing. Reach for comment. White House spokesperson Michael Gwynn asked to go off record. Gwynn later texted a statement from Press Secretary Jem Psaki. We would welcome any outlet banning the use of anonymous background quotes that attack people personally or speak to internal processes from people who don't even work in the administration. At the same time, we make policy experts available in a range of formats to ensure context and substantive detail is available for stories. If outlets are not comfortable with that attribution for those officials, they of course don't need to utilize those voices.
Right.
End quote.
Yeah. Exactly. That's what they're saying. If you don't like it, like, go call another president of the United States.
Yeah, but that's not fair. So then, but okay, that's not fair. But the people who will really suffer, well, the people who really suffer though, then will be the president, right? Because you'll say whatever you want, I guess, about.
Right.
Like,
so the president is going to stop doing this when people stop calling them for comment and start beating the crap out of them in print.
Right. Well, they're not going to do that though. So.
Yeah, right now they're just begging for scraps because they're already blowing the president in every story they write about him. So why should they agree to do anything? But
Peter Baker, the chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, said he remembers the practice beginning with reporters going back to sources and asking if a blind quote could be moved on the record. Quote, what started out as an effort by reporters to get more transparency, to get people on the record more, to use fewer blind quotes, then got taken by the White House, each successive White House, as a way of taking control of your story. So instead of transparency, suddenly the White House realized, hey, this quote approval thing is a cool thing. We can now control what is in their stories by refusing to allow them anything without our approval. And it's a pernicious, insidious, awful practice that reporters should resist. Baker conceded that he's no purist. He has agreed to quote approval but believes reporters ought to push back.
Yeah, I don't know. I do that all the time. Like, I just I do it because most of the time when I'm talking to somebody, it's not hostile, and we both want things to be correct, and that's a good way to guarantee that everybody's happy in the end. Obviously, there are other kinds of interviews where you don't have a situation like that, but normally in those interviews, they have to talk to you anyway. So it seems silly to me. I mean, this whole idea of oh, they had an opportunity to edit it first. It's their own words. Like, you know, it's really not that big of a deal. Like, oh, okay, we're not. You're taking away our ability to do gotcha quotes.
I do have just a quick Stone moment. This is from back in April, but I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about it. And this is Jill Biden saying something in front of a group of union leaders and farm workers gathered in Delano, California. And what we're going to hear is her attempting to pronounce the slogan from the United Farm Workers. And it was an event honoring Cesar Chavez, of course, the founder of the United Farm Workers. That slogan is "Yes, we can." I don't know if you know, but it's in Spanish. So it's "Si se puede" is what it is in Spanish. Okay, so let's hear her.
So say it with me. Si se puede. The future is ours. Thank you.
So just so people who don't speak Spanish understand this, it's "Si se puede," which is spelled Puede. And she makes it sound kind of like Polish. Si se puede. And so like that would be spelled Pwadwe.
Right.
So it's pretty funny.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. No, yeah. She leaned into it though.
Yeah,
so
she really did.
It's an A for enthusiasm.
Yeah.